Alright, just going to show you a quick video on how to service your FSA direct mount brakes. Um, After riding these brakes for a while without service, it's a good idea to disassemble and take apart. You may find that your brake may not fully return upon releasing the lever. You can see here, after I squeeze the lever, the brake pads do return some of the way, but not all the way. Now, as most bicycle mechanics know, this could be related to contamination in your housing, and you may need to replace or lubricate that. But on these brakes, it also, it's possible to contaminate the pivots and other hardware, and they may just need to be cleaned and re-greased. If you're cleaning and re-greasing the brake, the first step is to remove the brake from the bike. Basically, just loosen the attachment cable here and loosen the fully loosen the two pivot bolts. Try not to drop your tools. The experienced mechanic may develop skills that the engineer who designed these brakes may not have. But these brakes are designed to retain the screws when they're loosened, so you shouldn't drop the screws. That said, the mounting spacers you may use do need to be held onto. Okay, so once you get the brake off, one little trick I like to do is you can just leave the cable end on if you just remove the barrel adjuster and leave it on the cable. Okay, now we got the brake over here, and we'll take it to the worktop bench to show you how to fully disassemble it. Okay, at the workbench here, the first step to disassembly is to go to the back of the brake, and you're gonna loosen the center axle. Now this axle is secured with Loctite, so it might be a little tight on your brake. Okay, loosen that. You can pull it out. The next step is to remove the spring. Now, the easiest way to do that is to fully tighten the spring adjustment. Now, note this brake was set on the loosest spring adjustment, so if you are having a return issue and you don't want to service the brake, you can tighten this screw to increase the spring tension. But it is easiest to remove the spring with this fully tightened. Now I need a pair of needle nose pliers, and looks like they're at a different workbench, so I'll be right back and grab those. Okay. Alright, back here with the needle nose pliers. Basically, you just want to grab the spring in here and pop it out of the groove on the arm. And you can set that aside and move on to the next step, which is removing these mounting bolts. Now these mounting bolts, you might think, oh, how do I get these out? They're not coming out. You do have to pull on them to get the thread started. Now this is like that screw retaining feature I was mentioning. Once you pull it out and get it thread started, you should be able to loosen to remove them. Just do both the left and the right. Okay, let's set these parts aside. Now you can pull or push out these axles. They can be a little tight, especially when the brake is a little dirty. Okay, if you can see here, basically there's some oxidation and contamination on this pivot, and that's what's causing this slow return. So you can take that arm, the left and right arms off, and basically these areas are the areas with potential sources for contamination and oxidation. So we're going to want to clean all that off. Alright, you can use any type of cleaner. Here we're just using this degreaser from Muck Off. I'm going to spray it on a paper towel here. You know, you can use soap and water, you could use any type of cleaner that you have available. Just cleaning off these axles. Adding grease to these axles periodically can help maintain their life. Helps keep corrosion and other contaminants from entering into the pivot. Yeah, it can just extend the life of your brake a little. Yeah, cleaning out the inside of the bushings is a little tricky, but it's also a good step. You use like a pipe cleaner or just use the end of a paper towel like I am here. Wipe out this area. You can even, you know, if you have a spray cleaner, you can spray it directly into the holes. Wipe it off afterwards. Try to get the inside and the back of the bushings, or just any contamination that you can see on the brake. Good idea to, you know, just give your brakes a general cleaning. That way they keep them looking fresh. Another area that may see contamination is this pivot on the centering screw here. You know, that can be disassembled in a similar way. On this particular brake, doesn't look like these are too contaminated in that area, so I'm just going to add a little grease. Yeah, I mean, just take your time and clean the brake well. Okay, next step is to apply a little grease to the inside the bushings. Here we're just using some bio grease from Muck Off, and any bicycle grease will work. Just apply a little bit on the inside of each of the bushings. Just trying to grease this pivot a little bit here. Kind of apply it from the side. Okay, next apply grease to the axles. You don't need a lot here, just once you install the brake, it should give you pretty good coverage. Okay, then you're going to want to assemble the brake basically in the opposite procedure we use to disassemble. This part's a little tricky. You got to make sure to have the right arm inside of the cable attachment post and the roller here. That roller is another good spot to apply a little grease. That area wasn't too contaminated on this brake, but I did wipe it off earlier. Okay, so yeah, I mean, the order you install the pivots is not super important, but just make sure all three get installed. The center axle is the only axle that gets tighten the torque, and just fully tighten by hand or around 8 Newton meters if you're using a torque wrench. Reinstall the mounting axles by threading them into the arms. Okay, and then you're going to want to install the spring. You can go ahead and loosen this bolt back out now for reinstallation. Just makes it a little easier to snap into the groove. The spring's installed around the pivot with the bushing on the end of the spring. This part's a little tricky to get right. It might take you a few tries, but once you just snap into the groove, you're good to go. The last step, of course, is probably to clean off all the grease from your hands, and then using that same degreaser, you can just wipe down the outside of the brake, clean off any excess grease that didn't make their way into the pivots or got pushed out during disassembly. During assembly. Okay, now collect all the small parts and head back over to the bike. Okay, as I said, the housing and cable can get contaminated, and honestly, replacement is probably the best solution, but to extend the time to replace, you can just use a little Tri-Flow lubricant and spray it inside the barrel adjuster here, and inside the housing. Moving the cable can help a little bit to get the lubricant to actually go inside. It's best not to get this on your brake pads or rims. Can degrade braking performance. Okay. All right. Okay, now we're going to reinstall the brake. You want to install any spacing washers you were using before onto the mounting screws, and just reinstall on the frame. Fully tighten these mounting screws. then reinstall the barrel adjuster and cable, and cable clamp bolt and clamp plate here. Make sure the groove on the plate lines up with the cable. Okay, now you will need your wheel to get this clamped at the right position, so your pads are spaced to the right width. But basically now I'll show you that after servicing, this brake's a lot snappier. We're not having any of the return issues where the pad didn't fully return, and should be good to go for another 100 miles or so, or 1,000 miles or so, if not sooner in more dirty conditions.